Parents refused to care for my twins while I was in emergency surgery, saying that I was a nuisance and a burden, since they had tickets to see Elton John with my sister. So I called a nanny from the hospital bed, cut all family ties and ended my financial support to them. 2 weeks later they showed up. I was in the middle of emergency surgery when my parents flat out refused to look after my twins. They claimed I was nothing but a nuisance and a burden. After all, they had tickets to see Elton John with my sister. From my hospital bed, I watched in disbelief as a video call from my mom blasted. "Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Elton John tickets for months." I sat there stunned, clutching my phone with trembling hands. It was Christmas Eve at Las Vegas Medical Center. In my room it was just me, my 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Emily, quietly playing in a corner, and a kind nurse named Valerie checking my vitals. The searing pain in my abdomen felt like a knife twisting inside me, but the callous look on my mother's face on the screen cut even deeper. "My name is Natasha Wilson, I'm 33, and for as long as I can remember, I've been an afterthought in my own family. My younger sister, Jessica, the so-called golden child, could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I couldn't even get them to watch their only grandchildren when I needed help during my emergency surgery for complications from my husband's death 6 months ago. The doctors had discovered internal bleeding that demanded immediate action. Yet all my parents cared about was their concert tickets and a Christmas Eve celebration with Jessica. When I finally asked them for help, my dad's response was brutal. "You're becoming a real nuisance and burden, Natasha. We're retired now, we deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." For 3 years I've been sending them $2,500 every month to help with their mortgage and expenses. Even after James died, I did it out of love and duty, convinced that family should stick together. How foolish I was. As tears fell silently onto the hospital blanket, Valerie gently squeezed my shoulder. "My friend Olivia is a professional nanny who specializes in childhood trauma. Let me call her for you," she said. The twins, too young to grasp the situation, had already lost their father in a car accident, and now they might lose me if this surgery went wrong. The thought terrified me, but it was nothing compared to leaving them with people who saw them as burdens. With pain shooting through my body and my heart breaking from disappointment, I made a decision. "Yes, please call her," I told Valerie. In that moment, I began cutting the poisonous ties to the people who had raised me without ever truly loving me. I hung up the phone and a flood of memories rushed in my childhood, where every achievement was overshadowed by Jessica's constant spotlight. I recalled how, when I graduated college with honors, my parents barely acknowledged it because Jessica had starred in a local commercial that same weekend. Even when I married James, they complained about the venue's distance from home. And when my twins were born, they visited only once, claiming the babies were too fussy for their liking. James had been my rock, a man who understood the pain of family neglect, having been estranged from his own father. "We'll build our own family," he used to say, "one that knows how to love unconditionally." But 6 months ago, a drunk driver stole him away, leaving me to raise our children while battling grief and depression. Despite my loss, I kept supporting my parents, even increasing my monthly contributions when they complained about inflation. I wanted to show that family should stand by each other. The irony was crushing. Here I was bleeding internally and possibly dying, while they missed one concert to care for me. Valerie returned with news that Olivia would arrive within the hour. "She's amazing with kids," Valerie assured me. "I used to work with trauma victims at Children's Hospital before becoming a private nanny. How much will this cost?" I asked, worry creeping into my voice. My medical bills were already piling up since James's insurance barely covered anything. "Don't worry about that now," Valerie said. "Let's focus on getting you ready for surgery." But I couldn't help thinking about the $2,500 I was scheduled to send to them next week, a sum that could now pay for quality child care. That thought sparked a long-buried flame of self-preservation. When Olivia arrived, she was everything Valerie promised. Kind, professional, and she immediately connected with the twins. Before being wheeled into the operating room, I mustered enough strength to ask Valerie for my phone one more time. With shaking hands, I sent 2 messages. One to my bank, canceling all future automatic transfers to my parents' account, and another to my parents. "I will no longer provide financial support. My children and I deserve better than to be your afterthoughts. Do not contact me again." As I was taken toward the operating room, amidst the pain and fear, I felt something unexpected: freedom. The surgery was successful, though I emerged weaker than before. I spent 5 long days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, grateful for Olivia who stayed with the twins during my recovery, and even took them to my apartment at night. During one of my more lucid moments, I noticed my phone blinking with notifications. 27 missed calls and a flood of texts from my parents and Jessica. Their messages followed a predictable pattern: confusion, anger, and desperate pleas about their mortgage payment. Not once did they ask how my surgery went or if the twins were okay. The final message from my father read, "You can't just cut us off like this. We have a cruise next month and the tickets are non-refundable." Jessica's texts were different. She seemed genuinely confused. "Mom and Dad just told me you were having a minor procedure. What's going on? Why are they freaking out about money? It dawned on me that they had lied to Jessica about the severity of my situation to justify their priorities. I decided to tell Jessica the whole truth. Even though I was still groggy from the medication, her reply was swift. "Oh my God, Natasha, I had no idea it was an emergency surgery. I would have watched the twins if I'd known." "I'm so sorry." Jessica wasn't cruel. She had just been raised to always put her needs first. Perhaps this revelation would help her see our parents for who they really are. By the time I was discharged, I'd made several decisions. First, I hired Olivia part-time to help with the twins during my recovery. Second, I contacted a lawyer to draft a will, naming a trusted friend as the twins' guardian should anything happen to me, certainly not my parents. And third, I blocked my parents' numbers, allowing only limited contact with Jessica as I tested her sincerity. Financially, it was a huge change. The $2,500 monthly payment had been nearly a third of my income as a graphic designer. Without that burden, I could afford proper childcare and maybe even rebuild the emergency fund that had been drained after James's death. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was slowly regaining strength. The incision still throbbed when I moved too quickly, but I managed better each day. Olivia was a godsend. She arrived every morning to help with the twins while I worked from home. My graphic design clients were understanding about my limited availability, and I was thankful for the flexibility of remote work. Jessica visited twice, bringing healthy meals and spending time with the twins. Our conversations were cautious at first, but eventually she opened up about her own struggles with our parents. "They always made it seem like you were choosing to distance yourself from the family," she admitted one evening as we watched the twins play. I began to see a new side of my sister, a side hidden beneath years of parental manipulation. Though I wasn't ready to trust her completely, I appreciated her efforts. Then came the knock at my door, a knock I'd been half expecting. Peeking through the peephole, I saw my parents in the hallway. My mother clutched her designer purse nervously, while my father stood there with his arms crossed, his impatience all too familiar. My heart pounded as I opened the door just enough to speak through the gap. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Natasha, darling, we've been so worried." My mother began in her sugary tone, immediately putting up my defenses. "You haven't been answering our calls. We needed to know you and the twins were okay." "I'm fine," I replied flatly. "Now if that's all." "It's not all," my father interrupted, pushing slightly against the door. "We need to discuss this ridiculous financial situation. The bank called about our mortgage, and we had to dip into our savings." The audacity of it all was breathtaking. Not once did they ask about my recovery or the twins' well-being, only demands about money. "I told you I'm cutting financial ties," I said firmly. I meant every word. "I've been sending money out of guilt and obligation, while you couldn't even watch your grandchildren during my emergency surgery." "That's not fair, Natasha," my father shot back. "We had plans more important than your life or our grandchildren." "Do you know what the doctor said?" I countered, anger rising. "There was a chance I might not survive that surgery. Did you even care?" Their silence said it all. My mother, in a dramatic whisper, pleaded, "Are you really going to punish us like this?" "This isn't punishment, Mom. It's consequence," I said calmly. "I had spent my whole life seeking your approval, and in my darkest hour you chose Elton John tickets over helping me." Before I could continue, my father snapped. "I'm a parent too," I retorted. "I would never treat Ethan and Emily the way you've treated me." Just then, Emily toddled into view, clutching her stuffed giraffe. My mother instantly softened, bending down with a forced smile. "There's my precious grandbaby." Emily, unfamiliar with these relatives, backed away and looked at me with uncertainty. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "I'll talk when I'm ready, if I'm ever ready. And leave the money behind." As the door closed, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. For the first time, I had finally put myself and my children first. Later that night, lying in my own bed with the twins asleep just down the hall, I was overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. There was guilt, the ingrained feeling that I was somehow wrong for prioritizing us. There was fear about recovering while caring for 2 toddlers. But above all, there was a newfound sense of self-respect. Then my phone pinged with a text from Jessica. "I just had a huge fight with Mom and Dad about how they treated you. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" In that moment, I realized I wasn't completely alone after all. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was gradually regaining my strength. The incision still throbbed if I moved too fast, but I was managing better each day. Olivia continued to be a blessing, arriving each morning to help with the twins, while I worked from home as a graphic designer. My clients were understanding, and I was grateful for the remote work that let me be near my children. Jessica visited a couple of times, bringing healthy meals and spending precious time with Ethan and Emily. Our initial cautious conversations eventually gave way to honesty about our shared past with our parents, how they'd made it seem like I was choosing to cut ties when in fact I was simply done with being taken for granted. Then one day, as I pushed my cart through the supermarket's vegetable aisle with Emma playing happily in the child seat, I locked eyes with a familiar figure. It was Vanessa, thin, pale, and stripped of all her former glamour. For a moment we stood frozen. Vanessa's eyes flickered to Emma, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Natasha," she managed in a trembling voice. After a long, heavy silence I spoke calmly. "How are you?" Vanessa stumbled. "Is that your daughter?" I nodded. "Yes, Emma." She wiped her eyes. "She looks just like you." "Not now," I said softly. "I'm taking Emma." I turned my cart and headed into another aisle. In that moment I felt a spark of pity for my sister. Pity, not anger. That night, when I recounted the encounter to Greg, he asked, concerned, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied, gazing out at the starry sky. I managed to stay calm, despite everything. He reached for my hand. "Can you ever forgive her?" "It's not about forgiveness," I murmured, looking toward Emma's quiet bedroom. "We're still trapped by our past, and that may be our greatest punishment. But I have a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a family that truly cares about me now. Something they can never take away." Outside, under the glow of a new moon, the stars shone brightly. A sign that a new cycle had begun. I had grown stronger from my past pain and learned what true family meant. Meanwhile, far away, my parents and Vanessa spent their days steeped in regret. Haunted by the realization of all they had lost through their heartless actions, I gently closed the door behind me, my father's last words echoing, "It's no longer your concern." The next morning my parents returned with Aunt Patty, my mom's sister, always the family peacemaker. "Natasha, honey, let's be reasonable," Aunt Patty pleaded from outside my door, which I still hadn't opened. "Your parents are struggling without your help. They managed their finances for decades before I started sending money." I replied through the door. "They chose early retirement knowing their savings wouldn't cover everything." My mother's voice cracked as she added, "We made those decisions because you promised to help us. We've even had to cancel our cruise, and now we might lose the house." Their manipulations were transparent now that I'd stepped back from the guilt that had bound me for years. When had I ever promised lifetime support? I'd only offered temporary help after their retirement, yet somehow that turned into an expectation of permanent aid. "Mom, Dad, I'm recovering from major surgery and taking care of 2 toddlers. This conversation is over," I said firmly, turning away as their knocking and pleading faded behind me. Later that day, I received a group email from my father addressed to the entire extended family. It painted a picture of how I had abandoned them in their time of need, conveniently omitting their refusal to care for my twins during my emergency surgery. Instead, it portrayed me as an ungrateful daughter who cut them off without reason. They hadn't anticipated the backlash. Cousin Michael, who lived nearby, fired back with comments like, "Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last month?" Aunt Diana chimed in, "And wasn't that a new diamond tennis bracelet you were flaunting at Thanksgiving?" Other family members began privately messaging me, begging for the full story. Even Aunt Patty called after learning the truth. "They told me you were just being dramatic about a routine procedure," she admitted. Jessica, my younger sister, had completely taken my side after witnessing our parents' behavior. Together we crafted a simple, factual response in the family email thread. A brief statement that I had undergone emergency surgery with a significant risk to my life. Soon after, Cousin Michael's wife dropped off home-cooked meals, and a second cousin I barely knew offered her services as a part-time babysitter, completely free of charge. Jessica started spending weekends at my apartment, getting to know her niece and nephew while helping me recuperate. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation deteriorated rapidly. They had indeed been living beyond their means, counting on my $2,500 monthly contributions to maintain their lifestyle of travel and luxury. Jessica discovered they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house a year ago to buy their boat, assuming I'd forever subsidize their primary mortgage. They were overspent, not destitute, and would be fine if they sold the boat and the vacation timeshare. Their desperate voicemails and texts continued, but every day their hold on me weakened. I was building something new from the ashes of their betrayal. A genuine support network based on mutual care instead of obligation. 1 month after my surgery, an unexpected twist occurred. My parents received a foreclosure notice. Jessica called me, her voice a mix of concern and exasperation. "They're in complete panic mode. The bank is giving them 60 days to catch up on payments or they'll lose the house." "What about their retirement funds?" I asked, bouncing Emily on my knee as Ethan napped. "They spent a chunk on that boat and then invested the rest in some scheme Dad's golf buddy recommended. They've lost almost everything," Jessica sighed. "I'm not saying you should help them, Natasha. I just thought you should know." That evening, desperate texts poured in from both parents. My mother's message was especially revealing. "We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would start sending money again in a week or 2. Their assumption that my boundaries weren't real infuriated me. After years of putting their needs before mine and accepting their mistreatment, they'd never truly respected me. Meanwhile, my life was transforming in unexpected ways. The support group I joined became a lifeline, connecting me with other young widowed parents facing similar challenges. Through them I met Diana, a real estate agent whose husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier, leaving her with a 3-year-old son. She helped me explore options I'd never considered, like selling my cramped apartment and using the equity to move to a more affordable neighborhood with better childcare. I'd also started a small side business designing memorial websites, inspired by the one I created for James. Word was spreading, and for the first time since becoming a widow, I felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The contrast between my growth and my parents' collapse became even more apparent when they showed up unannounced at my apartment again, this time carrying a detailed spreadsheet of their debts. "We need $14,000 to catch up on the mortgage and avoid foreclosure," my father explained, his tone usually so authoritative now laced with desperation. I invited them in, not out of obligation but simply to hear their perspective, now that they were truly facing consequences. "What about selling the boat?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit at my small dining table. "We'd have to take a loss." My dad protested and my mom quickly added, "And the timeshare we've tried but the market is terrible. Besides, those are our retirement luxuries." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Luxuries you can't afford? We could afford them with your help," my father countered, his tone hardening. "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked quietly, letting the question hang in the air like a challenge. At that moment the twins toddled into the room, Ethan clutching his favorite truck and Emily babbling happily. Instantly my parents' expressions softened. "There are our precious babies," my mother cooed, reaching for Emily, who hid behind my legs. "They've hardly seen you at all," I stated simply. "You've only been involved 3 times in their lives, that's not fair." My father protested, "We're busy people. Too busy for your only grandchildren, too busy to help you during your emergency surgery, yet not too busy to ask for money." I observed quietly. "That says everything about your priorities." My mother's face crumbled. Was it genuine emotion or calculated manipulation? I couldn't tell anymore. "Without your help we lose everything," she whispered. "I lost my husband," I replied steadily. "My children lost their father, we survived, and you'll survive too." 3 months after my surgery, my parents faced the inevitable. They were forced to sell their house to avoid foreclosure. Jessica kept me updated. They downsized to a modest condo from their 4,000 square foot lakefront home. Dad reluctantly sold his boat at a loss, and they unloaded the timeshare for a fraction of what they'd paid. Now they were even blaming me for their financial troubles in front of everyone. Jessica told me, "It's bizarre. They tell anyone who will listen that you abandoned us after promising lifelong support." I simply replied, "Let them talk. The truth speaks for itself." My extended family largely rallied around me after learning the full story. Even my father's sister, who'd always taken his side in family disputes, called to express her support after hearing about their refusal to help during my surgery. My own situation improved dramatically. Diana helped me find and purchase a small 3-bedroom house in a family-friendly neighborhood. My new mortgage payments were actually lower than my old apartment rent, and for the first time my twins had a backyard to play in. My side business designing memorial websites grew enough that I could cut back on graphic design work and focus on projects that felt meaningful. Olivia still helped with childcare 3 days a week, but I adjusted my schedule to maximize time with Ethan and Emily. Most importantly, I found a community. Neighbors brought casseroles when we moved in, and the support group even organized play dates. I had cut ties with my parents, yet I felt less alone than ever. 6 months after my surgery, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. I almost tossed it aside unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a genuine apology. "I've had time to reflect on my behavior," she wrote, "and watching you build a life without our help forced me to confront some painful truths about myself as a mother. I was jealous of your independence and resented that you didn't need me the way I wanted. When you asked us to care for the twins during your surgery, you were reaching out and we failed you completely. I'm deeply sorry." The letter went on to explain that they had completely restructured their finances. My father had taken a part-time job at a local hardware store, and they'd sold most of their luxury items to live modestly for the first time in decades. They didn't ask for money or even forgiveness. They just wanted acknowledgement of their mistakes. I showed the letter to Jessica, who was skeptical at first. "They'd been talking about writing to you for weeks. Dad was against it at first, but I think he's starting to see things differently now, especially after his heart scare last month. He'd had chest pains and was now on medication, following his doctor's orders." I wasn't ready to respond immediately. I needed time to process my feelings. Was this genuine remorse, or just another manipulation? Had they truly changed, or were they simply adapting their strategy? That night, I looked through old family photos for the first time since cutting ties. Behind the smiling faces, I saw the patterns I'd been blind to for years. My parents had always been performers, playing the role of perfect parents while putting their own needs first. A year after my surgery, I finally agreed to meet my parents at a neutral spot, a quiet cafe near my new home. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. My father seemed smaller somehow, his confident posture replaced by a humbler demeanor. My mother's designer clothes had been swapped for simple, practical attire. The twins were with Jessica for the afternoon. I wasn't ready for a full family reunion, so we sat in awkward silence until my father did something unprecedented. He cried. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, voice breaking. "I've been an even worse grandfather. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally see how selfish we've been." My mother reached out with a tentative gesture, not quite touching my hand but inviting me to. "We've spent months in family therapy. It was Jessica's idea. And though we resisted at first, it's been transformative." I didn't rush to forgive or make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I showed them pictures of the twins and told them about our new life. They listened, without interrupting, without making it about themselves. Perhaps for the first time ever, as we parted ways, my father asked quietly, "Would it be possible someday to know our grandchildren?" I considered his question carefully before replying. "That depends on your actions, not your words. If you're genuinely committed to change, we can start with short, supervised visits. Understand this. My children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother." Walking away from that meeting, I felt neither the crushing weight of obligation nor the burning resentment I'd carried for so long. Instead, I felt the calm assurance of a woman who knows her worth. A mother who has set boundaries and will enforce them without apology. Whether my parents can truly change remains to be seen, but I have already transformed from a daughter desperate for approval into a woman fiercely protecting her children with clear expectations.